Pamela, Jillian, and myself will be briefly explaining our social action project to you all today. We are working with the Muriel McQueen Fergusson Centre for Family Violence Research located at the University of New Brunswick. Our project is to create a toolkit that will be used by service providers who are working with women with disabilities who are experiencing interpersonal violence. You may have noticed that we are presenting this project using a video format. We are doing this in an attempt to present information to different people in more accessible ways. We have added subtitles to accommodate any persons who are deaf or who have hearing difficulties, and audio is available to those people with vision loss. Our target population is not just an isolated group, but encompasses a great many people. Anyone with a disability, whether that is physical, intellectual, or developmental, is more at risk for experiencing violence compared to the general population. In addition to the disability piece, our project has a great deal of intersectionality that includes varieties of culture, race, sexual preferences, gender, religious affiliations, etc. Statistics Canada reports that men and women with disabilities are twice as likely to be victims of violent crime. This is due largely in part to the vulnerability that society attributes to this population of people. Society has made it very difficult for people with disabilities to flee dangerous situations, which is why this research is so crucial for service providers. Based on findings from previous research, the silos that service providers work in make it difficult to provide the best service to someone with intersecting needs. This is incredibly important given that 6 in 10 victims of violent crimes who turn to a formal service for assistance have a disability, with women more likely to do so compared to men. This research aims to break down those silos and build bridges across sectors. We are trying to turn these kinds of discouraging facts into empowering narratives.
Taking a turn to the policy side of things, Canada made a commitment when signing the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities that individuals with disability have the freedom to be free from exploitation, violence, and abuse. There have also been strides towards ending sexual violence and gender violence by creating laws and acts such as the Intimate Partner Violence Intervention Act and the Family Services Act. However, there has been a gap between the acknowledgement that those with disabilities experience more interpersonal violence than the rest of the population, and that the rates of violence increase if the individual is women identified, is non-heterosexual, or is from a different cultural background other than Caucasian. The misinformation that exists is caused by a lack of research and the myths and stereotypes about interpersonal violence and persons with disabilities. Persons with disabilities are often labeled as asexual. However, they've also been labeled as overly sexual as well. This is likely because there are different labels of disability. For example, those who have intellectual disabilities are often assumed to be non-sexual, and those with other mental health issues may be labeled as hypersexual. This all compounds to the effect that persons with disabilities are often not believed when they disclose experiences of sexual violence. There is also a tendency for persons with disability to be treated in a paternalistic manner, which is disempowering. Two social movements that have a profound effect on the recognition that the social problem of interpersonal violence against persons with disability exists is the disability movement and the women's movement. The disability movement has focused on equal opportunities to employment, education, and accessibility to services, transportation, and housing. This movement brought public awareness to an inequality that needs to be addressed and is still being addressed. The women's movement has developed into strong feminist movements that have led to women fighting for laws to punish those who abuse women and recognition of the gender inequality that exists. Both these movements over time have allowed like-minded individuals to come together to fight for better services and more informed discourse. The Muriel McQueen Fergusson Centre is a feminist organization which has and continues to conduct research to inform policy and programs. The current project, which looks at women with a disability regarding difficulties encountered when accessing the formal system, has specific goals and objectives that are in line with the Centre's overarching goal to end all gendered and family violence. The knowledge from the current research will help inform service providers about the available resources for persons with disability who have experienced interpersonal violence. The information collected will be used to inform a toolkit for service providers. The hope is that with more information of what exists for services and what the needs of persons with disabilities are, will help lead to collaboration among the various organizations. This will help break down perceived barriers and real barriers and help better locate gaps in services. The research process itself has acted as a start to the elimination of these barriers because it has created discussion among service providers. This has helped make a largely invisible social problem come into the public eye.
Our toolkit will seek to inform service providers and fill in the gaps of knowledge when it comes to women with disabilities experiencing violence. This population has been made more vulnerable by the barriers between them and potential services that may help them. People with disabilities have been noted as an invisible population, one that we know is present but is rarely seen due to the aforementioned barriers. The toolkit will attempt to deconstruct these barriers, including one of the largest, which is accessibility. Our placement wants organizations to consider the accessibility of their services, which does not just mean that they are stationed in a building with a ramp. Accessibility goes beyond that, and there are more than just physical disabilities to consider. That is why we have chosen to present our project in this manner, showcasing an example of accessibility to those who may struggle with hearing impairments. The toolkit will also attempt to deconstruct the silos that service organizations tend to exist in, building bridges between these organizations to create a shared understanding of people with disabilities and the issues they face is crucial in trying to find a way to better serve them moving forward. This placement is one that has continued over from last year, in which they laid the groundwork by developing a table of contents for us to pick up and continue on with. Therefore, a number of strategies have been used in this placement. The previous students conducted focus groups with service providers to get their take on the issue of women with disabilities experiencing violence. We will also be using this strategy, as well as one-on-one interviews with women with disabilities about their experiences with services and the barriers they face. We will also be going on a province tour during Crime Week at the end of May to meet with different service providers to present some information we have learned and get their feedback. Our placement will also be hosting a webinar during that week for others to log on and to see our presentation. There is also a media aspect to all of this, as we will be contacting television news stations, newspapers, radio stations, and more to promote our province tour. All of this will be done in order to create the best toolkit possible. A number of organizations are involved in this project, particularly ones that have representatives on its research team. These include the Muriel McQueen Fergusson Centre, the University of New Brunswick, the Université de Moncton, Justice and Public Safety, Long-Term Care and Disability Support Services, which is stationed at the New Brunswick Department of Social Development, the New Brunswick Association of Social Workers, New Brunswick Community Living, New Brunswick Multicultural Council, Premier Council on the Status of Disabled Persons, Vie Autonome Péninsule Acadienne, and Women's Equality Branch in the province of New Brunswick. Outside of the research team, the Disabled Women's Network Canada, DAWN, and the New Brunswick Disability Executives Network, NBDEN, were also consulted for this project.
As social workers, it is crucial that we remain aware of our own privilege and use it to work towards social change through our everyday practices. We must remain vigilant in challenging all forms of oppression and remain aware of how different forms of oppression intersect to cause challenges for a person. As social workers, it is important we remain informed in the issues vulnerable populations face and address them with sensitivity. By using strategies like person-first language and working from an anti-oppressive lens, we show service users that we will have their best interests in mind. In order to maintain status in society and receive needed services, people may feel as though they have to assimilate into the dominant society. To best care for service users, we may need to strategically bend the rules and make changes from within the system itself. We can help alternative organizations, organizations used to achieve justice, equality, and welfare for the othered populations, by helping them keep informed of policy changes that may affect them, by helping them acquire necessary resources, or even by working or volunteering at these alternative organizations. We all have a part to play, and our project will help in establishing what service users need from us as service providers.